Well, now we're concluding tonight our interviews with the party leaders. A little later we'll be talking to Micheál Martin, but right now we're joined here in the studio by the Fine Gael leader, Enda. Mr. Kenny, you're very welcome to the programme. Michael Noon has been saying that whoever ends up in power, and whatever combination of parties or parties end up in power, it's going to be a very, very difficult period of time in the immediate future, tackling the very severe economic and fiscal problems we face. And we know that there's a €9 billion adjustment to be made under the IMF deal, and you've said that you would make that by a combination of tax cuts or tax increases and spending cuts, with 2/3 on the spending side. Now, what kind of spending cuts and savings are you saying to the Irish people you will bring in?
Well, we said 2.4 billion in tax and 6.4 billion in savings. I'm going to just put that in context here, that obviously we've analysed what the problem is, what's been broken, the structures that need to be fixed, and how we go about that. And as you know, our plan sets out that. In terms of the taxation issues, we say 539 million in closing tax breaks for the rich. Right. Pension reforms 575 million.
Can I just on the savings side, on the cut side, what are you proposing?
Okay, let me give you the main headings. Reduction in the departmental programmes of 1.2 billion. The public sector pay bill, downsizing that payroll, 2.4 billion.
And how, sorry, and those departmental savings, how is that achieved?
Well, you're talking about the public sector reform and numbers. We say an additional 18,000 voluntary redundancies over the 12,000 by the government. We say $1 billion in respect of fraud from social welfare. And also welfare reform is 1.96 billion. So this makes up our 6.4 in a ratio of 23.
So leaving aside the payroll savings, how would the cuts affect the services that are delivered to people?
Well, we don't want to impact on frontline services like Gardaí, teachers, nurses, doctors, physios, local authority workers. But you're going to have cuts, for instance, in terms of energy subsidies. We would say, instead of continuing these because they're quite costly, end them by 2013. Bring forward that subsidy money, which will generate increased activity for tradesmen, for builders, and for those who want to avail of that service, which will create jobs, which is what our whole focus is about.
In relation to
the first point of our plan is about jobs, job creation and protection of employment.
Okay, in relation to numbers in the public service, an additional 18,000, 30,000 reduction in public service numbers,
10%.
but done on a voluntary basis and without affecting frontline staff. So if you take frontline staff out of the equation, how many are you left with to get that 30,000 from?
Well, you're talking about a downsizing of the public payroll numbers of 10% over the 4 years. That's 30,000. Now, 12,000 will retire due to normal age retirement. So we're seeing 18,000 through all state agencies, all departments, HSE.
But if you exclude frontline staff, nurses, doctors, teachers, Gardaí, members of the defence forces, what are you left with?
I think what you need here is a definition of what is a frontline service.
Exactly.
Not all of these are obviously in the frontline in the sense of being teachers, Gardaí, nurses or doctors. There are those who deliver essential public services like water engineers or cleaners.
Sorry, just to come to the question, where does the 30,000 come from? What's the pool you draw from?
Back office and administration.
And how many if there are of those?
Well, for instance, we've got 1,500 offices around the country that take down names, addresses and PPS numbers on a regular basis. You have...
but have you got a number of public service employees who are in the category from which these redundancies will come?
Well, out of the 300,000, you've got to define what your frontline service is.
Yes, and that's what I'm asking you. What are the numbers on the front line and the numbers who will
well,
from whom these
on your definition of front
line. Well, I'm asking you for yours.
Most people, well, my definition is what is an essential service that's being delivered here, and our focus is on the back office administration, where duplication occurs. We've identified 145 quangos to be assimilated or gotten rid of.
But I'm still trying to establish. Sorry to cut across you, Mr. Kenny, but from what pool of what numbers will you draw this 30,000 reduction?
You're going to have.
Will it be 50,000, 100,000, 200,000?
You want to downsize the public numbers by 10%, which is 30,000 out of 300,000. Because you've got to downsize that payroll cost. Otherwise, we can't protect the public salaries of these people, which we want to do. And our focus is on keeping taxes low and protecting jobs.
A $6 billion investment plan you propose. Where's the funding going to come from?
The National Pension Reserve Fund. and the sale of non-strategic assets. Now, I saw your clip earlier on where Micheál Martin said that it's only in the last 3 days that Fine Gael made this known. If Micheál had been around, he would have known that when we published our New Era document over 2 years ago, we identified a number of non-essential state agencies or state assets that could be sold, like ESB power generation, but keeping the transmission system.
How much do you think those sell-offs would raise?
Well, for instance, Davies did a study on this, and they would assume, I reckoned, that you could raise about 4 billion in respect of the sale of non-strategic state assets. So, but I'm not talking about selling those immediately at an appropriate time. You could start the process by taking money from the National Pension Reserve Fund and do it over a 4 to 5 year period.
The banks. Would Fine Gael and government continue to put billions more into the banks?
We've committed, obviously, certain monies for recapitalisation. The stress tests are going on now, solvency, liquidity. Fine Gael would not put more money into the banks unless there's burden sharing by the non-guaranteed bond holders, and I think we've got to wait and see what the stress test.
Does that include the 10 billion that was to go in just the other week, but was deferred?
That was the 7 billion that Brian Lennon was to put in. That was committed.
Will that go ahead?
That will go ahead, but I think it's only prudent to wait and see what the full scale of what this debt challenge actually is.
Before that goes ahead, or are we talking about further?
No, I think we'll wait and see when the stress tests are actually published very shortly after the end of March. And I think the same is going to apply at a later date for other European countries and other European banks.
So the further 25 billion then is dependent on the outcome of the stress test and no commitment as far as you're concerned to put those funds in?
We think that the deal, the IMF deal signed off by Micheál Martin's government is bad for Ireland and bad for Europe and should be renegotiated on the basis of cross-European support and consent on the issue of the interest rate and on the issue of the cost of the bank structure that's in it. But I think it's only realistic to wait until we see what the actual scale of the indebtedness here is. But Fine Gael would not be willing to put in other monies without burden sharing by those unguaranteed bondholders.
Which of course will have to be negotiated because it's part of the IMF deal.
Yes, Lord, yeah.
Just a final question. If you find yourself in a position where you are able to put together a single party government, but perhaps with the support of a couple of like-minded independents, would that be the sort of deal you'd look at after the weekend?
Well, this election's been different than any other. People have given huge support for what they see as a clear and credible way forward in terms of the Fine Gael plan. Our message to our voters and our supporters until 10 o'clock on Friday night is continue to sell that. Yeah. I haven't given any instruction to anybody to vote anywhere else beyond voting for the Fine Gael ticket.
Would you be willing to lead a minority government?
I'd look at the consequences of what the people decide on Friday. This is the great thing about politics and democracy. We are now, the politicians are now in the people's hands. There's only a few hours left. They make the choice, and whether you like it or whether you don't, you have got to live by that consequence. But I look forward to the opportunity of having a go at implementing a real plan to bring our country forward and sort out our difficulties.
Enda Kenny, there we'll leave it. Thanks for talking to us till 6 o'clock.
Thank you, Brian.